Okay, so you've been praying. God has put a person on your heart. They could be a close friend, family member, even a random stranger you see every day at Starbucks or maybe the skate park. How do you begin? Well, you start with the conversation, not some presentation. People don't want to be preached at. They want to have a real conversation, which involves give and take. So here's a powerful way to help you share the gospel without cramming it down someone's throat. We call it ask, admire, and admit. So it's easy for you to remember. You ask questions, you just get to know them. You admire everything you can about who they are and what they believe, and then you admit the reason you're a Christian is that you're a sinner who desperately needs the gospel. You desperately need Jesus. Ask, admire, admit. Let's start with ask. Did you know that Jesus asked more questions than anyone else in the entire New Testament? He asked about 300 questions in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus knew that asking questions stirred people's thinking and got them talking. But before I ask anyone questions, I ask God to give me wisdom to know which questions I should ask that particular person. I ask God through His Holy Spirit to guide the conversation. Then I begin to ask them questions. Now remember, you're asking questions not to try to trick someone or to try to find out where they're wrong about God. You're just asking questions to get to know them on a deeper level. And here's a simple rule of thumb to remember as you engage someone in conversation. People like to talk about themselves. So before you dive into the gospel, ask questions about them. Questions like, hey, where are you from? What's your family like? What do you do for fun? What sports do you play or hobbies do you have? What's your favorite TV show? What's your favorite game? Stuff like that. And you try to find areas of commonality. You're trying to find common ground. Now, of course, if you're talking to a close friend, you may already know the answers to many of these questions. But if you're talking to someone you're just getting to know, these questions can help you begin to connect. But don't stop there. The goal is to move from conversations about fun, family, friends, to asking questions about faith, their faith. You're moving from the unspiritual to the spiritual. You're trying to dig deeper. For instance, let's say you're standing in a Starbucks next to a stack of newspapers that have the headlines, "Earthquake Kills 1,000 People in China." Maybe you ask the question while pointing to the headlines, hey, have you ever wondered why God allows so much suffering in the world? Or maybe after a class where the teacher is talking about how the entire universe came about through random chance, you asked your classmate, hey, have you ever wondered if God had a role in making the universe? Or let's say you're watching a television show with one of your friends and a movie trailer for a real scary movie comes on. You could ask, do you believe in the supernatural? You know, angels, demons, and all that stuff? You can also be more direct if that's your style. Questions like, hey, who do you think Jesus was? Or do you go to church anywhere? Or hey, what's your religious background? You can be direct, you can be more subtle. It depends on your style. The key is always be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Always ask God to give you wisdom to know which questions to ask and when to turn that conversation toward Jesus. And you always have to be ready because you never know when that door, that opportunity will be there. That door will swing wide open. However God guides you to steer the conversation toward the subject of faith, it's fine. Just do it with love and care, but do it. It's at this point that we switch from just asking questions to admiring everything we can about what someone else believes. This is what the Apostle Paul did when he entered the bustling city of Athens. These Greeks, they had thousands of altars to thousands of false gods, but Paul found one altar that even he could admire. Matter of fact, in Acts 17, 22 through 23, the Apostle Paul writes, Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. What therefore you worship is unknown, this I proclaim to you. And then he goes on from there to share the good news of Jesus with the Athenians. See, Paul uses the altar to the unknown God as a segue to the true gospel. He admires the Athenians for their commitment to the spiritual, and then he compliments them again for building an altar to the unknown God. He admires everything he can about what they believe. He even quotes one of their pagan poets in a positive way. Now, how do you do this? How do you pull a Paul? How do you do this if your friend is a Mormon or you just meet some Mormons? I remember once I was picking up my kids from the babysitter. The babysitter took my two children to a frozen yogurt place, and I walk in, and there's my two children and our babysitter, and they're all kind of looking funny. They're kind of going like this. And I'm like, what? And they're like, And I look over and there's 2 young Mormon missionaries there having some yogurt, taking a break from riding their bikes and going door to door. And my son mouths to me, "Hey, Dad, let's see what you got." And he was calling me out to share Christ with these Mormons. So I went over there and I decided I was going to ask, admire, and admit. I began to ask them questions. Where are you guys from? Originally, how long you been doing this? What's your experience has been like? And then I began to admire everything I possibly could about them. I said, you know what? I appreciate you guys' commitment to family. I appreciate you guys' commitment to go door to door because you really believe in the message of Mormonism. And as I began to share, the walls came down. I was able to admit the reason I'm a Christian is I desperately need Jesus. We had a great conversation. Now, did these 2 Mormon missionaries trust Christ on the spot? No. Did we have a great conversation and were seeds planted? Yes. Now, you could do that if your friend's a Mormon. You could do it if your friend's a Muslim. You can do that if your friend is an atheist. Say, hey, I appreciate your commitment to science and maybe reason. If they're a Wiccan, then admire the fact that they're committed to a spiritual worldview. Ask questions. Admire everything you can about a person and what they believe, and then admit the reason you're a Christian is that you're someone who sins. You're someone who misses the mark horribly, if you're like me. And then you're someone who desperately needs the gospel. What is the gospel? See, they may not know what the gospel is. You can ask them, do you know what the gospel is? Have you ever heard of that word gospel? You can use that as a segue to share with them what you learned about the gospel in the what to share section of this app. Now, remember, you got to make it as personal as possible. You want to tie in your story. You want to have an actual conversation. You want to listen to their story. It's a dialogue, not a monologue that you're going for here. And remember, sharing the gospel, it's a journey. And on any journey, there are going to be pit stops, roadblocks, flat tires. Just be genuine. Look for the Spirit's leading. Remember to ask, admire, admit, and God will get you to that final destination on this gospel journey.